Hello, everyone, and welcome to the roundup for week two for Introduction to Philosophy 2020. I'm Associate Professor Chris Fleming, and today I just wanted to go over two of the main areas that we discussed in the first week in the lecture. Well, not a lecture, whatever we want to call it, lecture, tutorial, class, lectorial. Let's just call it class for now. So what we went over in class. These were two things. One was, and I'll get to this in a moment, the basic areas of philosophical inquiry, the kinds of things that philosophers examine, and also wanted to talk a little about philosophical reasoning and philosophical questioning. Part of what we did in week two was to give a sense of the kinds of questions that philosophers asked and the kinds of ways that you might pursue those questions. Now, why did we do this? Well, one of the points that I emphasized in week two was that philosophy is not just a body of knowledge that you learn, right? So, for instance, when you're in primary school, you probably had to learn your times tables. Or maybe in high school, if you're doing chemistry, you learnt the periodic table off by heart, in a way. In the old days, if you were studying law, you had to memorize certain torts and so on. Now, all of these things, it's legitimate. Of course, these are legitimate forms of learning and knowing. And there are there are elements of philosophy that are a bit like that. You remember a philosopher's name, you might remember the name of a text, and you might remember some specialist terms or the name of a concept. However, philosophy is not just that. It is not just being able to recall a name, recall a concept, being able to cite a book title, even if it's in German or French, or Latin or ancient Greek or whatever. It's not just a matter of being able to recall these things. Philosophy can only really be learned by doing it. It's something that you practice in the same way that you practice singing or you swimming or any of these kinds of skill sets. So philosophy is learned partly by memorizing certain facts, if you want to put it that way. That you kind of take on new ideas and names and so on, but it's really done in the practice of doing it. And that was really one of the reasons that I ran the workshop, lecture, whatever, in week two the way that I ran it, which was to take up a number of different philosophical issues and talk about them, argue them out, reason them out, see what came of that reasoning. Now, one of the means by which I did this was by putting forward a couple of thought experiments. Now, thought experiments in philosophy are ways, not the only way, but one of the ways that people test a particular principle to see whether it makes sense or it holds in different circumstances or whether it's something that we should give our allegiance to or whatever. Now, one of those principles that we test was the principle of lesser harm, right? So the idea is that very often in life, the existences that we live aren't always ideal, and we have to choose between the lesser of two evils in our lives. So one of the examples I gave you was that, normally, under most circumstances, many of us would hold that it's not a good thing to lie. All things being equal, it's not a good thing to lie. However, if someone comes to your door with a shotgun looking for your mother and asks where she is, it would be insane for most of us to go, oh, well, I better tell the truth, better say where she is, because we think, well, lying is an evil, but there is a greater evil here that I am going to offset with this decision. So this is the principle, the lesser of two evils, and one of the ways that we tested this was by examining the so-called trolley problem, which comes out of a 1967 paper by Philippa Foot. Now, what the trolley problem does is that it envisages a scenario where you have to choose, and if hopefully you were there, or you can look it up. I'm not going to go through all the details, but you choose to save generally more lives, or the more negative way to put it, you choose to kill fewer rather than more people in a situation where there's an out-of-control car or train or trolley or whatever. You switch this car or train or trolley over onto tracks and fewer people are killed. Now, many people didn't want to do, or some people didn't want to do that. Most seemed to be pretty okay with that. Then we started testing, mucking around with certain variables to see what changed. One of the things was, we said, well, would you push someone in front of this? And a lot of people stepped out at that point. Now, the question is, why would you do that? And what is it that has now changed. I don't mean in terms of like, what about the situation's changed? It's obvious what's changed. But why is that significant? What is morally significant about pushing someone as opposed to, say, flicking a switch and so on? Now, I didn't want to drill down here and go, well, and here is the answer. That's generally not how philosophy works. Now, there's an issue of philosophical progress and so on. I wouldn't mind talking about at some point. But nonetheless, this was one of the, I wanted to give you a flavour of what a philosophical reasoning and looks like, and what a philosophical problem looks like. Now, again, this stuff is not terribly remote. The kinds of decisions, for instance, that are being made currently around the world in hospitals, in fact, looks quite a lot like the trolley problem. There are people in triage situations that you have to treat, and you're going to let other people die as a result, and people are making decisions about this currently. So the examples I gave are kind of extreme and very odd, but the principles behind them and needing to think clearly about them, I think, are really, really important, and they're not just kind of crazy fantasy ideas. Okay, so let's just move on to the second and final consideration in this wrap-up, and that is the idea that I just wanted to go through very quickly, the basic areas of philosophical inquiry. Now, this is my list. I've kept it very, very simple, and you can enlarge in this list, and we will as we go on. But I wanted to start with something very, very basic. And what I said was that philosophers ask questions in three areas of inquiry. One is metaphysics, one is ethics, and one is epistemology. Metaphysics or metaphysical questions ask about the nature of reality. What is real? What is not real? This is the thing that human beings discuss all the time. What actually exists? What doesn't exist? Some people believe in God, some people don't. Right? Some people think love is this bizarre chemical reaction. Other people think love is a real force in the world. Right? So these are questions about what is and what isn't. Okay, and it's really important question to ask. Whether certain things are or are not. What is the reality? What exists and what does not exist. This was really, historically speaking, the first philosophical questions that were asked in ancient Greece were metaphysical questions. The second is ethics, and we've looked at that, and that's about questions of right or wrong, or good or evil. How should we live? What is it right to do, or how should I conduct myself in the world? What does it mean to be a good person? Or what is it, even in a broader sense, what does it mean to live a good life? What does it mean to live a happy life, actually, in quite an essential sense? And some of you might think, hang on, why are you talking about that? Isn't that like psychology, happiness? Well, philosophers have got a conception of happiness too, and what it means to live a fulfilling life. We'll definitely get to these bigger issues. The last one is, the last area of inquiry is epistemology, which concerns the theory of knowledge. What can we say we know? What can human beings legitimately say are within their grasp to understand or know? Can we have objective truths about the world? If so, what kind of truths can we have? Can we have truths about what other people are thinking? Can we have truths about history? Is science truthful? And so on. And so these are, in any case, these are the three areas that philosophers tend to look into. Now, they're not always called that. So there may be an area of inquiry, for instance, that draws on all three. So philosophy of religion may draw on philosophical, questions of ethics, reality and knowledge. Philosophy of law is exactly the same. Philosophy of education is exactly the same. Political philosophy, again, will raise issues in each of these. What is the nature of society? What is the society? What existence does society have? That's a metaphysical question, right? Anyway, so this, we can keep extending these kind of ideas out, but if you have a sense that they are the three basic kinds of questions, then you'll be able to adapt your thinking to different, more complicated philosophical issues. Now, one of the things I said, just to finish off now, in the workshops, was that students who studied philosophy, and these studies were done in the US, ended up doing better in their other units at university. Now, why is it? Well, one of the areas I haven't mentioned about philosophy, because it's really, in some ways, this is a contentious thing to say, but it's debatable. And if you are a logician, you'll want to debate with me. But one of the things it says logic is another area of philosophy. I tend to think of logic as something that prepares you. It's a kind of method of doing philosophy. Other philosophers, of course, study logic unto itself. But in any case, the way I'll present it now is logic basically studies how correct reasoning takes place. What is it to be reasonable or rational about something? Logic is the study of correct reasoning and also incorrect reasoning, how reasoning takes a wrong path. And we're going to drag that topic over from week 2 into week 3, and I may do an entirely separate video on that, as well as the issues that we'll be looking at. So there may be 2 videos for you. Anyway, look, I'm going to leave it here, and I will see you in class in week 3. I hope you're well. I really do hope you're well. And I'll see you soon.